Distillery. The human brain is wired for survival. But sometimes a wire comes loose. The stories you're about to see aren't just accidents, they're blueprints. Detailed, step-by-step instructions on how to fail at life in the most spectacular way possible. Consider this your anti-survival guide, a curated exhibition of humanity's most creatively dumb final moments. Do not follow these instructions. 1. The sun-baked landscape of Mesa, Arizona, is a testament to nature's brutal efficiency, a place where everything has evolved to survive, usually by being covered in razor-sharp needles. It was here, on a sweltering August night, that a man named David decided to challenge millions of years of evolution with nothing more than a skull full of cheap beer and an ego the size of a pickup truck. The evening began, as so many of these stories do, with an argument in a dusty bar. It wasn't about politics or money. It was about something far more fundamental: who was the toughest? As the boasts escalated, David, feeling the invincible glow of alcohol, decided a verbal declaration wasn't enough. He needed a demonstration, a physical feat that would etch his name into the annals of local legend. His eyes scanned the moonlit desert outside and locked onto a target: a colossal saguaro cactus standing about 20 feet tall, a silent, spiny sentinel of the desert. For those unfamiliar, a saguaro cactus is not a soft, cuddly plant. It is a vertical fortress of botanical pain, covered in thousands of needle-like spines, each one capable of piercing skin and muscle with terrifying ease. It's nature's way of screaming, "Do not touch." David, however, interpreted this as a personal challenge. Ignoring the slurred protests of his friends, he announced his intention. He was going to headbutt it. He saw it as the ultimate test of man versus nature. His friends, witnessing the birth of a truly monumental bad idea, tried to intervene, but reasoning with David at this point was like trying to explain quantum physics to a goldfish. He was on a collision course with destiny, or in this case, a large, stationary succulent. He took a running start of about 30 yards, building up what he surely thought was an impressive amount of momentum. In his mind, he was a charging bull, an unstoppable force of nature. The cactus, for its part, just stood there, having successfully defended itself against far smarter predators for over a century. The moment of impact wasn't the heroic crash David had envisioned. It was a sickening, wet, and multi-pointed thud. The laws of physics, unmoved by his bravado, delivered their verdict. David's forward momentum drove his head and upper body directly into the cactus's trunk, and hundreds of those unforgiving spines embedded themselves deep into his face, neck, and chest. He was, in effect, instantly pinned to the cactus, a human dart in nature's dartboard. The shock and the sheer, overwhelming pain were instantaneous. His friends, who had been laughing moments before, stared in horror as their buddy hung from the plant, his triumphant war cry replaced by a gurgling shriek. By the time paramedics arrived, David had died from a combination of massive trauma and cardiogenic shock. In the aftermath, the story became even more absurd. Officials from the Arizona Commission on Agriculture and Horticulture were called in, not just for David, but for the cactus. The saguaro is a protected species, and an investigation concluded that, aside from a few bent spines and some residual human stupidity, the cactus was completely unharmed. It remains there to this day, a silent green monument to one man's catastrophic failure to understand that some arguments are best left lost. 2. The standard bathtub is a marvel of domestic engineering, designed for relaxation, hygiene, and perhaps the occasional rubber duck flotilla. It is decidedly not designed to be a high-yield distillery for creating black market vodka. This distinction was tragically lost on a woman named Svetlana from Novosibirsk, Russia, who viewed her tiny apartment bathroom not as a sanctuary of cleanliness, but as a potential source of revenue. Svetlana had a dream: to brew her own potent moonshine, bypassing pesky things like taxes, regulations, and basic chemical safety. She'd acquired a ramshackle, second-hand still, a crude contraption of copper tubing and questionable welds that looked less like scientific equipment and more like a failed high school science project. Her plan was simple: set up the operation in the one room in her apartment with a drain and a water source. Now, for anyone who managed to stay awake in chemistry class, A quick refresher. Distillation involves heating a fermented liquid to separate the alcohol, which turns into vapor. This vapor is then cooled, condenses back into a liquid, and voila, you have high-proof spirits. There is one tiny, insignificant detail about this process. The alcohol vapor is intensely, unbelievably flammable. It's essentially an invisible cloud of rocket fuel. Proper distillation requires massive amounts of ventilation to prevent these fumes from accumulating. Svetlana's laboratory, a small, windowless, Soviet-era bathroom, was the literal opposite of well-ventilated. It was a sealed tile box, perfect for trapping steam, soap scum, and, as it turns out, explosive vapor. Undeterred by minor details like self-preservation, she fired up her leaky still. As the mash heated, the system began to work, but its shoddy construction meant that a significant amount of the potent, vaporized alcohol was escaping directly into the small room. She likely dismissed the overwhelming chemical smell as the sweet scent of impending profit. The air in the bathroom grew thicker and thicker with a clear, odorless, and highly combustible gas. Every cubic inch of the room was becoming a potential bomb. All it needed was a spark. That spark was graciously provided by the pilot light of her apartment's water heater, located just outside the bathroom door. It had been patiently burning, waiting for the exact moment the concentration of fuel and air reached its perfect, explosive ratio. That moment arrived with a deafening, building-shaking whoomp. The accumulated vapor ignited in a single, catastrophic fireball. The explosion blew out the entire wall of her bathroom and kitchen, sending debris, porcelain, and shattered dreams raining down onto the street several stories below. When emergency services arrived, they found a scene of utter devastation. Svetlana was discovered amidst the rubble of her ambitious but poorly executed business venture. The official report cited an unauthorized and improperly ventilated chemical experiment as the cause of the blast. Svetlana had successfully turned her bathtub into a distillery, but the first and only batch she ever produced had a kick so powerful it brought the house down. Literally. 3. Let us introduce you to Kyle from Lubbock, Texas, a man who subscribed to a very particular brand of a can-do attitude, one where can-do meant modifying things for purposes their designers never, ever intended. Kyle was a grilling enthusiast and a proud truck owner, and in his mind, these two passions were not mutually exclusive. He had stumbled upon the concept of engine block cooking, a niche culinary art form that involves using the heat from a running car engine to cook food. For most, this is a quirky novelty, something you try with a hot dog while parked. For Kyle, it was a practical solution to eating on the go. He believed his V8 engine wasn't just a power source, it was a mobile convection oven, and he was its head chef. His dish of choice? A thick-cut Texas ribeye. The basic physics are simple enough. An engine gets hot enough to cook meat wrapped in aluminum foil. The problem, however, is that an engine bay is not a Weber grill. It's a chaotic environment of spinning belts, high-pressure hoses, and flammable fluids. More importantly, to use this grill, you typically have to be operating the 2-ton vehicle it's attached to, often at considerable speed. This introduces the pesky variable of multitasking, a skill Kyle tragically overestimated. On one fateful afternoon, he was cruising down a long, straight stretch of Texas highway at a steady 70 miles per hour. His foil-wrapped steak was nestled snugly on the engine's intake manifold, sizzling away. The aroma of cooking beef, mingled with the faint scent of motor oil, filled his cab. He decided it was time. The steak needed to be flipped to ensure an even, perfect medium rare. A sane person would pull over to the shoulder, stop the vehicle, and safely perform this delicate operation. Kyle, however, was not a sane person. He was an innovator, a pioneer of highway gastronomy. Pulling over was for quitters. He decided he could execute the maneuver while maintaining his speed. The sequence of events that followed was a masterclass in terrible decision-making. With one hand on the steering wheel, he popped the interior hood latch. He then grabbed a pair of long-handled tongs with his other hand, leaned out the window, and attempted to unlatch the hood from the outside while the truck was still hurtling forward. For a few precarious seconds, he was driving blind. his body contorted, his focus entirely on the culinary task at hand. His prize, the perfectly seasoned steak, was his only priority. In that critical moment of distraction, as he fumbled with the hot metal and sizzling beef, the truck began to drift ever so slightly to the left. It was a small deviation, one he would have easily corrected had his eyes been on the road instead of his lunch. But they weren't. The truck's front left tire kissed the rumble strip, but before Kyle could react, it caught the edge of the concrete median. The resulting impact was instantaneous and catastrophic. Highway patrol officers arriving at the scene were greeted by a surreal tableau of destruction. Amidst the twisted metal of the wreck, they found the source of the driver's fatal distraction. There, lying on the asphalt, was a beautifully cooked, perfectly seasoned ribeye steak, tragically orphaned. Kyle had successfully combined his two greatest loves, driving his truck and grilling a steak, and in doing so, created a recipe for disaster that had only one serving. 4. In the world of intellectual combat, chess stands supreme. It is a game of quiet contemplation, strategic foresight, and profound patience. A battlefield of the mind where kings and queens fall without a single drop of blood being spilled. At least that's the theory. In a community center in Warsaw, Poland, a man named Marek was about to prove that theory spectacularly wrong, demonstrating that even this most civilized of games could end with brute force and a coroner's report. Marek was not what you'd call a graceful loser. For him, a chess game wasn't a friendly duel of wits. It was a deeply personal referendum on his own genius. He treated every move with the gravity of a battlefield commander, and every captured pawn as a direct, vicious insult. His opponent for the evening was a quiet, unassuming man named Grzegorz, who had the unfortunate habit of being very, very good at chess. The game had been a tense affair, a long, grinding war of attrition across the 64 squares. For a while, Marek was in control, a smug grin plastered on his face as he methodically dismantled Grzegor's defenses. But then the tide turned. Grzegorz, with the quiet focus of a master, sacrificed a bishop in a move that seemed insane, but was in fact the beginning of a breathtakingly brilliant trap. Marek's smugness quickly curdled into confusion, then panic, and finally, a deep, simmering rage. He watched in horror as his position collapsed, his queen captured, his king flushed out into the open, cornered and helpless. Grzegorz made his final move, slid his rook across the board, and softly announced, "Schachmat." Checkmate. For Marek, this wasn't just a loss, it was an existential failure. The carefully constructed edifice of his ego crumbled into dust. In that moment, his brain bypassed all rational thought and connected directly to his primal rage circuits. He let out a roar that startled the other players in the room, shot up from his chair, and in a feat of adrenaline-fueled fury, he grabbed the edges of the heavy, solid oak chess table and flipped it. The table, a piece of furniture that had witnessed decades of silent, thoughtful games, went airborne, landing with a crushing thud directly on Grzegor's foot. The pain was sharp and immediate. Grzegorz, yelping in agony and acting on pure, unthinking reflex, did the only thing that made sense. He shoved the source of his pain away from him with all his might. He wasn't attacking, he was reacting. But physics, unlike chess, is not a game of strategy. It is a game of absolute rules. The heavy table, propelled by Grzegor's pain-fueled shove, became an improvised projectile. It traveled the short distance back across the playing area and met the one object still in its path: Marek's head. The impact was sickeningly final. Marek dropped to the floor, his reign as the club's most volatile player coming to an abrupt and permanent end. When paramedics arrived, they found a bizarre scene. One man hopping on a broken foot, and another lying perfectly still, a victim of the world's most violent checkmate. In the end, Marek had achieved a rare distinction in the annals of chess. He managed to lose the game and his life in the same move, a grandmaster of self-destruction, who rage-quit not just the board, but existence itself. 5. The fishing pier is a classic theater of human versus nature, a place where hopeful tourists dangle strings into the ocean, hoping to outsmart a creature with a brain the size of a pea. It was on one such pier in Florida that a tourist named Gary decided to escalate this conflict, not with a fish, but with a bird that looked like a holdover from the Jurassic period. A large, surly-looking brown pelican. Gary was a man on a mission, and that mission was to generate content. He wasn't there to enjoy the salty air or the thrill of the catch. He was there to capture a viral video, a few seconds of internet fame to show his friends back home. His chosen co-star was a magnificent multi-pound pelican, perched regally on a wooden piling. The bird had just successfully dive-bombed a school of mullet and was now contentedly letting its lunch slide down its gullet. To a normal person, this was a moment of natural beauty. To Gary, it was a content opportunity begging to be exploited. His brilliant idea? He was going to poke the wild, powerful bird with the tip of his 10-foot fishing rod to get a funny reaction. Now, a brief lesson in pelican biology that Gary tragically skipped. Pelicans are not feathered jesters waiting for their big break on TikTok. They are wild animals. And when startled or threatened, particularly during takeoff, they have a highly effective defense mechanism. They lighten their load. This means they regurgitate whatever is in their pouch with considerable force. It's the avian equivalent of dropping ballast. Armed with his flimsy rod and a profound lack of respect for wildlife, Gary put his plan into motion, while his friend dutifully filmed. "Check this out," Gary narrated, inching closer. He extended the rod and gave the pelican a gentle poke. The bird shifted, ruffled its feathers, and gave him a look of pure, unadulterated disdain. Gary chuckled, emboldened. He's a feisty one. He poked it again, this time with more force. That was the final straw. The pelican decided it had had enough of this terrestrial paparazzi. With a mighty squawk of indignation, it launched itself into the air. At the exact same moment, its biological defense system engaged. With the practiced ease of a feathery mortar, the pelican ejected its recent meal, a 2-pound, half-digested, incredibly slimy mullet, directly downwards. The fish, now a biological missile, followed a perfect ballistic trajectory, accelerated by gravity, and scored a direct hit on the top of Gary's head. The impact of the wet, heavy, piscine projectile was far more effective than anyone could have imagined. Gary's eyes went wide with shock, then rolled back into his head as he was knocked completely unconscious. His body went limp, and he toppled sideways off the pier, landing in the water with a quiet splash. By the time his friend stopped laughing and realized what had just happened, it was too late. Gary, the aspiring viral video star, had sunk beneath the waves, taken out by a fish he didn't even catch. He had successfully provoked the bird, and in return, the bird delivered his final meal with an accuracy that would make a sniper jealous. He got his unforgettable footage, but unfortunately he wasn't around for the editing process. 6. Is there any domestic task more mundane than checking the fuel level in your car? It's a simple question, usually answered by a quick glance at a dashboard gauge. But for one gentleman in Oregon named Frank, this simple query was about to become a complex and ultimately fatal physics experiment. Frank's problem was a common one. The fuel gauge in his old pickup truck was broken, stuck permanently on full. A cruel, mocking lie. For days, he had been playing a risky game of automotive roulette, guessing how much gas he had left. One dark, moonless night, his curiosity finally got the better of him. He needed to know, and he needed to know now. He strode out to his driveway with a determined air, but he had overlooked one small detail. He didn't have a flashlight. His phone, the modern-day multi-tool, was also dead. A lesser man might have given up and waited until morning. But Frank was a problem solver, a man of action who believed in using the tools at hand. And the tool he had in his pocket was a disposable cigarette lighter. At this point, a chorus of alarm bells should be screaming in your head. For those who need a refresher on why this is a bad idea, let's have a quick science lesson. Gasoline in its liquid form is surprisingly stable. Gasoline vapor, however, is another story entirely. It is a highly volatile, invisible cloud of explosive potential that fills the empty space in every gas tank. It's essentially a booby trap waiting for one thing: a source of ignition. Frank was about to deliver that ignition, special delivery. He confidently unscrewed the gas cap, releasing a faint hiss of fumes, the sound of opportunity knocking, if opportunity were a pyromaniac. He leaned over, put his face near the opening to get a good look, and held the lighter up to the hole. His brain, apparently on a coffee break, saw no issue with introducing an open flame into a chamber filled with explosive vapor. He clicked the flint. The result was not a gentle flicker of light, but a cataclysmic, instantaneous fire. A violent jet of fire erupted from the gas tank, a reverse dragon's breath of pure chemical energy. The fireball engulfed Frank in a split second, providing him with a brief, horrifying, and extraordinarily vivid answer to his question. Yes, there was indeed gas in the tank. A lot of it. The ensuing fire quickly consumed the truck and alerted the entire neighborhood that Frank's DIY auto repair session had gone horribly wrong. Firefighters arrived to a scene of roaring flames and the distinct smell of burnt foolishness. In the end, Frank's quest for knowledge was a success. He received a final, undeniable moment of enlightenment, a lesson in combustion that was, sadly, not graded on a curve. He fatally discovered that the best way to check your gas tank in the dark is any method, literally any other method, than the one he chose. 7. Every once in a while, a situation arises that calls for a hero, a moment when an ordinary person must step up and do something extraordinary. And then there are situations that call for getting the hell out of the way. Differentiating between the two is a critical life skill, one that a man in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, named Marco, spectacularly failed to master. Marco was enjoying a coffee at a street-side cafe when he witnessed the start of a slow-motion disaster. A city bus, parked at the top of a moderately steep hill, began to roll. Its parking brake had apparently given up the ghost, and the multi-ton vehicle embarked on a silent, leisurely, but inexorable journey downhill. The street wasn't crowded and the bus was moving at barely a walking pace. It was a problem, to be sure, but a manageable one. A problem for the authorities, or perhaps for a well-placed curb. But in Marco's mind, this was his moment. This was the scene from the superhero movie that had been playing in his head his entire life. He saw himself not as Marco, the accountant, but as Owen Creevil Homem Parada, the incredible stopping man. He saw the headlines, the cheering crowds, the key to the city. He didn't see the 17 tons of steel and glass bearing down on him. Ignoring the shouts of other bystanders, who were wisely choosing the getting out of the way option, Marco sprang into action. He leaped from his chair, tossed his newspaper aside like a discarded cape, and sprinted into the middle of the street. He planted his feet firmly, adopted a powerful stance, and held his hands out in front of him, palms forward, as if he could command the laws of inertia to take a coffee break. For those who need a quick physics refresher, force equals mass times acceleration. A city bus has a mass roughly equivalent to 3 adult elephants. Marco had the mass of a slightly overweight accountant. The math was not in his favor. The bus, oblivious to his heroic posturing, continued its descent. Onlookers watched in a mixture of horror and sheer disbelief. It was like watching a housefly try to halt a glacier. The bus's massive, flat front bumper made contact with Marco's outstretched hands, then his chest, then the rest of him. There was no epic struggle, no moment of dramatic tension. He simply disappeared. One moment he was a man with a hero complex, and the next he was a human speed bump. The bus rolled over him without so much as a jolt and continued its lazy journey down the hill until it gently nudged into a lamppost and came to a stop. When emergency services arrived, the cause of the tragedy was painfully obvious. Marco had attempted to fight a battle of physics with pure, unadulterated confidence, and physics had won by a technical knockout. He had successfully stopped the bus about as effectively as a piece of paper stops a bullet. His heroic stand became a local cautionary tale, a permanent reminder that while it's noble to want to save the day, it's crucial to first check if the day is being threatened by something that weighs more than your entire apartment building. 8. In the picturesque parks of England, amid the manicured lawns and serene ponds, lives a creature that embodies a peculiar contradiction, the mute swan. It is a bird of breathtaking grace and elegance, a living symbol of royalty and romance. It is also a feathered psychopath, a notoriously territorial and aggressive beast with the temperament of a cornered badger and the striking power of a lightweight boxer. This crucial second part of the Swan's resume was tragically unknown to a woman named Amelia, who was determined to prove a point to her friends. Amelia was convinced she was a real-life Disney princess. She believed she possessed a unique magical connection to the animal kingdom, an ability to communicate with and soothe the wildest of beasts through sheer force of her gentle personality. Her friends were, to put it mildly, skeptical. To settle the debate once and for all, she chose her subject, a particularly large and majestic male swan, known to locals as Mr. Hissy. Ignoring the bird's very obvious and very audible hissing, a sound that in the animal kingdom translates universally to "I am about to ruin your day," Amelia approached with her arms wide open, cooing at it in what she imagined was a calming, princess-like tone. Mr. Hissy, who had never seen a Disney movie and was not impressed by her performance, interpreted this as a direct invasion of his territory by a large, loud predator. As Amelia leaned in for the hug that would validate her entire worldview, the swan responded, not with a gentle nuzzle, but with a sudden, explosive fury. It rose to its full height, flapped its enormous, powerful wings, which have a span of over 7 feet, and delivered a series of rapid, sledgehammer-like blows to Amelia's chest and head. The force was staggering. Amelia, caught completely off guard, was knocked off her feet and stumbled backward directly into the cold, murky water of the pond. The assault, however, was far from over. A swan's job is to defend its territory until the threat is neutralized. As Amelia flailed in the water, shocked and disoriented, Mr. Hissy continued the attack. He swam over to her, hissing and beating his wings, pecking at her head and shoulders, preventing her from regaining her footing or swimming to the edge. Her friends, frozen in horror on the bank, watched as their friend's Disney fantasy turned into a brutal nature documentary. By the time anyone could intervene, it was too late. Amelia had drowned, held underwater by a furious feathered demon who was simply doing what swans do best, protecting their space with extreme prejudice. Amelia had set out to prove she was a princess who could talk to animals. In the end, she became a grim lesson in zoology, a testament to the fact that wild animals don't follow a script, and that some fairy tales have incredibly dark and surprisingly violent endings. 9. The Suburban Garage. It is the sacred workshop of the weekend warrior, a kingdom of power tools, half-finished projects, and the intoxicating smell of sawdust and gasoline. It was in one such garage in Akron, Ohio, that a man named Jerry decided to perform a bit of amateur automotive surgery that would land him squarely in the Darwin Awards Hall of Fame. Jerry's old pickup truck had a leaky gas tank. It was a minor drip, but it was annoying, and Jerry was a man who believed in the power of a DIY fix. Why pay a certified mechanic hundreds of dollars when you had a perfectly good arc welder and an unshakable sense of self-confidence? He correctly identified the location of the small hole in the steel tank. His solution was also, in theory, correct. Weld a small patch of metal over it. The one variable in this equation that Jerry fatally underestimated was the concept of fumes. He knew, on a basic level, that a full tank of gasoline would be a bad thing to introduce to a 3,000-degree electrical arc. So, he did the logical thing and drained the tank. Or he mostly drained it. He figured the few remaining drops, the residual vapor clinging to the inside of the tank, were negligible. He treated the concept of gasoline fumes with the same casual disregard one might have for a "may contain nuts" warning on a candy bar. In the world of combustible materials, mostly empty is a terrifyingly deceptive phrase. A mostly empty gas tank is, in fact, far more dangerous than a full one, as it contains the perfect, pre-mixed ratio of fuel vapor and oxygen, the two key ingredients for a spectacular explosion. It is not a container. It is a bomb. Unaware that he was about to perform an act of unscheduled high-speed aviation, Jerry donned his welding mask, fired up the welder, and lowered the buzzing electrode to the tank. The instant the electrical arc made contact with the metal, it ignited the highly explosive vapor inside. The result was not a small fire or a pop. It was a deafening concussive detonation. The gas tank exploded with the force of a small bomb, turning Jerry's garage into a war zone. But the explosion did more than just destroy the truck. It turned Jerry into a projectile. The blast launched him vertically, like a human cannonball. He shot through the wooden rafters and shingles of his garage roof, traveled in a beautiful, terrifying arc over the fence that separated his property from his neighbors, and finally landed with a bone-shattering thud in the middle of his neighbor's prize-winning petunia bed. The neighbors, who had been enjoying a quiet afternoon barbecue, were suddenly witnesses to a man literally falling from the sky into their backyard. By the time paramedics arrived, there was nothing they could do. Jerry had made a fatal miscalculation, learning the hardest way possible that the difference between empty and mostly empty is about 75 feet of unplanned air travel. He had successfully fixed the leak in his gas tank, but created a much larger Jerry-sized hole in his garage roof. 10. For some people, a hobby is a relaxing pastime, like knitting or stamp collecting. For others, it's a deep dive into history. And for a man named Stefan in Bavaria, Germany, that hobby was collecting military memorabilia, specifically from World War II. Stefan loved the authenticity, the weight of history in his hands. Unfortunately, he was about to experience that history a little too authentically. His latest prize, acquired at a flea market, was a German rifle grenade from the 1940s, a Gewehr-Sprenggranate. The seller had assured him it was deactivated, an inert piece of metal, perfectly safe. Stefan, a man who trusted the word of a flea market salesman over the collective wisdom of every bomb disposal expert on the planet, took it home to his workshop. The grenade was covered in decades of rust and grime, and Stefan wanted to restore it to its former glory. It was going to be the centerpiece of his collection. His restoration plan involved several steps, the first of which was cleaning off the rust. He could have used a chemical rust remover or a simple hand brush, but Stefan was a man of efficiency and power tools. He decided the quickest way to get the job done was with a high-speed angle grinder fitted with a wire brush wheel. For those unfamiliar, an angle grinder is a powerful tool that spins a disc at over 10,000 revolutions per minute. When a wire brush on an angle grinder meets old, rusted metal, it creates two things in abundance: friction, which generates intense heat, and a shower of hot, glowing sparks. Now, let's consider the object being cleaned. A sealed metal canister from the world's most destructive conflict, filled with decades-old, notoriously unstable explosives. The seller's assurances of it being deactivated were, to put it mildly, inaccurate. The grenade was very much alive, a grumpy 80-year-old bomb just waiting for a reason to finally go off. Stefan was about to give it that reason. He clamped the grenade in a vise, switched on the angle grinder, and lowered the screaming, sparking wheel onto the grenade's rusty surface. The moment the sparks hit the thin, corroded metal casing, the still volatile explosive compound inside detonated. The resulting explosion was devastating. It instantly obliterated the workshop Stefan and a significant portion of his house. When emergency services arrived, they found a crater where a hobby room used to be, and shrapnel from both the grenade and Stefan's power tools embedded in the walls of neighboring houses. Stefan's passion for historical authenticity had reached its logical and explosive conclusion. He had wanted to restore a piece of World War II history, and in a way, he succeeded. He managed to recreate a very small, very loud, and very fatal moment of it right in his own basement. 901. And that's our 10. 10 perfect examples of when your brain's last good idea clocks out for the day. Now for you. Drop a comment with the absolute dumbest, most dangerous idea you've ever had, but were smart enough not to try. We want to hear about the disasters you narrowly avoided. The best worst idea gets pinned. And while you're typing, hit like and subscribe for more cautionary tales.